Shut up and sit down.
I'm Kittson O'Neill, Artistic Associate here at Interact, and I'm having a conversation with...
I'm Will Snider, the playwright of How to Use a Knife.
We're going to talk about plays, and kitchens, and all kinds of stuff.
I grew up right outside D.C. and like around College Park, Maryland. I went to high school in Northeast D.C.
So you're like an East Coaster.
Yeah, East Coaster through and through, which I'm living...
Let me ask the most relevant question. Did your parents work for the CIA?
No. I mean, but if they did, I wouldn't say.
Yes, you might. You might be like, no, they were in foreign relations.
Yeah. They work for the State Department.
That's right.
No. They did not. You know, they're creatures of DC, but they were not. They were not spies.
Did they run a restaurant?
No.
Okay, so tell me about.
They like restaurants.
So this is your play, obviously.
Yeah.
At a restaurant.
Yeah.
Restaurant. Lots of restauranting. Have you worked in a restaurant?
I have. Moving to New York to write plays, I knew I needed a job to pay the rent. And
playwriting didn't pay the bills, right?
I know. I was shocked. I was so shocked.
So different from everyone else's experience.
Yeah. I was like, "Where's the money? I'm here. I'm ready.
I arrived.
I've got to play. Where's the money?" No, I worked for the first 2 years in restaurants for one restaurant, and sort of moved up from kind of busboy, we called it back waiter, but it was essentially busboy position to a food runner position to then expediting the line for a while, which was,
What does that mean, expediting the line?
So it's, sometimes it's a chef, but other times it's a person who's just a part of the tip pool as a kind of food runner, and they're kind of in the status of a busboy, but they are, and there's a lot of variation on this, but they are the ones who are essentially getting the tickets that come in that are the food orders, and they're calling them out, and then they're actually helping to kind of give the line cooks who are working a lot of different ticket orders at once some sense of order in terms of what they need to make. So
what priority
so you basically are you're helping them kind of manage all of these different items they're making, and also there's course lines that divide the different courses, so you're getting some appetizers out there, and then this was actually a self-firing kitchen, so waiters were not firing the next courses from the POS terminals. It was actually the kitchen that 15 minutes after the apps went out were like, that's the time at which we're going to send out the second course unless the waiters are sent to hold fire. Right. This is very detailed, but for me it was it felt very intense to be a part of that job, but I wasn't a back of house person. Like, I could not work the line. I would be terrible at it. And so it was humbling and kind of terrifying to have to expedite these people that knew so much more about what they were doing than I did.
Right.
But my function was just literally to help them out, but actually part of that was to kind of yell at them and be confident in sort of leading it, even though I knew I couldn't do their job. But I was so fascinated.
So you're Jack in the play.
Yeah, essentially, in a lot of respects. But I was, I just became fascinated with it as a space to make a play, partially because I was just there every night. But also this was a place where they're really like one of the last work environments with kind of no HR department, and people say things to each other in the way that you might playing sports or in a kind of, or what I've seen from like a war movie, but you could say really cruel and sort of un-PC things to one another, and the game of it was like you couldn't get offended, and because it was happening in the moment, people were sort of like, and there was also, people would scream at each other. And I think the best restaurants try not to function that way, and this was a good restaurant, but I feel like all restaurants, there's the potential for this. But then 2 hours later, you're at a bar having beers with those coworkers and you're friends again. And I think it was really interesting to me that it's like you could see this, it just was like, this is a play. I think there's something so fascinating about this space. And also, it's really, in a city like New York that's so diverse, and any major city where there's a lot of diversity, it's actually one of the few places where there is real cross-demographic interaction by necessity, and where I felt like I was working with coworkers who I wouldn't see in my bar in my neighborhood. We would leave.
You're not going to run into them at a play reading.
Yeah, and if I saw them on the subway, I might not, it just felt like we were so intimate at work. Yeah. We really backed each other up.
It has like the perfect formula, really.
Yeah.
Right? Wildly diverse people, wildly different goals thrown into a space of intense pressure where they have to work together.
Yeah, and where they're all saying terrible,
and with license to say whatever they want.
Yeah. I mean, a kind of level of it's intense. And so I was like, I want to set a play here.
So what inspired you to I don't want to give too much of the play away, but was there somebody you met, or was this like what inspired you to introduce the element of sort of like the possible war criminal hiding in plain sight? Like what inspired that?
Well, two things. I mean, one is these restaurant jobs are, especially at the level of kind of sort of line cook, but also dishwasher. I mean, there are jobs that you can get if you have, like, there are people who are, former felons working as dishwashers. Like, they're denied other jobs, but this is a job you can get.
Right.
And it's a place where, it's sort of one of the last. I mean, not that these ever existed, but there is a kind of a meritocracy in the kitchen, which is if you can keep up, that's all that matters.
That's all they care about.
Yeah, like where and these institutions have to deal with that there are plenty of undocumented workers, and so which is not to say that like there are tons of I just think it's a place that doesn't care where you came from if you can keep up to a degree. I mean, there are definitely limits to how far you can climb within the industry for sure. But it seems like at the base level, they will hire people and take chances on people who don't provide a lot of information about where they came from. But I was also fascinated by the way that, in addition to being a cross-demographic world in terms of class and race, it was also a cross-demographic world in terms of nationality. Mm-hmm. I worked in the first kitchen, in the one that I spent the most time in. All the line cooks were from Puebla in Mexico, and all the dishwashers were from Mali. And I mean, that's because
they get their people jobs that they
somebody doesn't show up to work or lose a job, and then somebody has a brother or a cousin or someone they know through a sort of support network of immigrants largely, and they pull them in. But it had this weird effect of fixing, like, the line all spoke Spanish, the dishwashers all spoke French, the busboys spoke mostly English, but then a smattering of bad Spanish and French, and then, so it was this weird kind of like United Nations behind French immersion school by this restaurant. So there were like a child and a parent walking down the street speaking to each other in French, and he was like, I want to speak to them. Like, I want to, there was this moment of kind of realizing that his life, because this guy was working as a dishwasher in the morning at this restaurant for brunch shift. Then he was going to actually go sleep in a park and then go work a night shift. So he was at a different restaurant.
Okay.
So these lives, I mean, they were remitting money back home. Mm-hmm. And this was also around the time, and this was in 2011, which I believe was around the time of some violence in Timbuktu in the north. Mm-hmm. And so I was asking him, just like, how was your family? Okay? And his family was not in Timbuktu. But it was striking to me that I feel like we would endure these kind of like shifts where you really relied on each other, and somebody getting, as the runner who's polishing glassware, we really wanted to have a good relationship with the dishwasher to keep the machine running. Yeah. And so I felt you feel this kind of sports-like intimacy with everyone, but you actually don't know.
At the end of a shift, you're like, good game, you guys.
Yeah, there is a kind of like, there's that kind of collegial relationship, but you actually don't know anything about who they are. I mean, you feel this intimate connection, but you don't know their biography. You might know loosely where they're from or their nationality, but there's so much that we don't reveal because simply we didn't have enough time, right? And I was struck by the potential of like what would happen if you did peel back and learn someone's story. What would that teach you about them?
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things in this play, right, is when that begins to peel back, suddenly we're having this really difficult conversation about violence, guilt, and like the repercussions of the choices you make in your life, and like what other people should do about it.
Yeah.
And like which I'm not going to talk too much because I feel like then we get to like the exciting part of this.
Well, and then, it's a fascinating environment.
Yeah. I've also worked in a couple of different
what's been your experience working in restaurants?
Well, I mean, of course, because I'm a girl, I always worked in the front of house. Like, so for me, the restaurant experience was all about presentation. And like, I mean, I've always gotten along really well with chefs because in my heart, I would much rather be in the kitchen, but that's a very male environment, which is true in our play. Yeah. It's a really masculine environment.
I mean, in some kitchens, I mean, there are female line cooks out there that are really like doing it. I think, and I feel as though the industry hopefully is shifting. But you're right.
You have to really love it. As a woman, you would have to be like, this is my mission. And for me, I was like, I'm just trying to pay for my headshots.
Yeah.
I didn't care.
Well, that's the other tension and that's in the play a little bit is between kind of lifers in the restaurant and people for whom this is just a means to pay the bills. And I think there is a certain amount of understandable resentment. You know, if somebody is coming in and casually saying like, I am doing your job, or I'm working in this space, but this is not who I am.
Your industry isn't worthy of my full attention.
And then there's people there for whom this is their number one passion. This is their art. And I think there are a lot of cooks and chefs who probably feel that way. Although there are also cooks who are just doing it to make money, but at the front of house, well, at the highest levels, there are servers that is their identity, and they're very good. But I think there's, we all know from in the theater industry, there's plenty of us for whom it is just a job to pay the rent, and that it's also there's a tension there because the back of house is not paid as much. I mean,
as a waiter, you can make tons of money.
Yeah, for a much shorter period of time. And if you're working the line for 10 or 14 hours a day and making an hourly that's below 15, that
sucks.
Yeah. And then a waiter comes in and works a 5-hour shift and makes $400 in New York, which can happen. And that for less, I mean, they still work hard, the waiters work, but it's not the same.
They're not going home with like burns all over their arms. And, and add to that the tensions of race, class, nationality. Where it became a fascinating environment. I think the issue of race is also obviously a big one in the piece. Like the people of color all work in the kitchen. There's no, and that was true for me. I actually worked at Greenwich Country Club, and the summer that I worked there as a waiter, there was a big expose, and African-American lawyer went undercover to apply for a job at the country club with like a really amazing resume as a waiter. When he arrived and they saw he was black, they were like, we have a busboy position for you.
Wow.
And this was true at the club at the time. I mean, I don't want to besmirch Greenwich Country Club. I'm sure they were wonderful now. But at the time, no people of color worked front of house.
Yeah.
And then that was just not done at the club. And it was like an unspoken prejudice that just existed in the club.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I imagine a lot of those systemic problems have continued in a lot of those.
I'm sure, because how do you really enforce that kind of stuff? So speaking of our careers, tell us a little bit about like your path as a playwright. Did you go to college to be a playwright? How'd you end up in this crazy mixed up world?
Yeah, I went to college. I took some playwriting classes, and I was doing. There was a pretty robust student theater scene. I went to undergrad at Columbia, and there was a major, but actually there were a lot of people who were majoring in other things and doing theater on the side. So there was a real great opportunity to kind of practice without necessarily majoring.
So committing all the way.
Yeah, and then some people who didn't major in it still went on to do it as a career, and then others it was just sort of their hobby in college. Right. But we try to do it at a very high level. I did history, and then eventually, sort of 2 years through, switched to a kind of focus on East African history. And then after college, I worked off and on, for 2 years solid at first, but then off and on for a total of 3 years in East Africa for an agricultural microfinance institution or an agricultural development company. And partway through that job, I knew that I was like, playwriting, which I had thought of as kind of a hobby. I was like, I would like to give this a shot, and I knew that it was going to involve going back to the city and waiting tables and sort of like just and I knew that like the more I advanced in this other career, the harder it was going to be to sort of change tracks. And so I just sort of I knew I had to do it, and so from there I was in New York then for 3 years, and then went to grad school at UC San Diego. I was really lucky to get a chance to go there, and so that's been my path so far.
Wow. So now are you back in New York now?
No, I'm finishing up at UCSD right now, so I'm in San Diego.
You're finishing this year though, right?
Yeah. I'm actually just graduating in a month or so. And so I'm really, I'm trying to figure out what's next, which I'm not sure. And do you have any advice? I'm not.
Come to Philly, we're cheap and amazing, and you can get to New York.
I love Philadelphia so far. I think it's great.
We're all fans. Cool. So now the play's it's a rolling world premiere.
Yeah.
So talk about the other productions in the other theaters.
Well, the amazing thing about this rolling world premiere program is that they took a chance on this play, and they took a chance on it with 4 different theaters banded together to do it. And for me as a young playwright, I was living in this world of new play readings. Like in New York, I felt like it's a good year if I had 1 or 2 readings that year.
Right.
But what I saw among my peers is that we were all kind of writing to these readings, and so we were writing like radio plays. I mean, I think that you don't really learn how to talk to designers. You drop kind of spectacle from your work because you are focused so much on language and so much on new play readings.
Right. And I love feedback in the reading that's like, I didn't really understand that. It's like, well, yes, because
You didn't
many
see it,
elements
yeah.
are missing.
But it also changes
Yeah.
the way you write, because you are thinking about how something sounds in just a stage reading.
Right.
And especially for this play, How to Use a Knife, it was like we wanted to, it's in a kitchen. The choreography of the kitchen is so essential
Yeah.
to the piece that readings, though, they went well and I liked them, they never really captured, I mean, for instance, Carlos and Miguel don't have quite as many lines as the chef, but they are like working the entire
constant
time.
motion.
Yeah, and so getting a sense of that kind of like widescreen of the kitchen was really, I couldn't get it from a reading.
Do you know Arnold Wexler's play, The Kitchen?
The Kitchen, yeah, he passed away last year, and so I've been told to read it, and I really,
You really
want
should.
to. Yeah.
It also takes place in a kitchen. And,
Yeah.
it's very different from your play, but it also embraces the same thing that is, I think, for us, one of the production enticements of your play, which is like, here's an intense and like cauldron of a work environment, and you will need to create a choreography that is in constant action in that work environment. Arnold's play is like that too. It's like the everybody's sort of passing through, and like it's really compelling, I think, to get inside a really powerful it's almost like a secret place. We all go to restaurants,
Yeah.
but many people have no idea what's happening in the back, and like
It's true of theater as well.
Right, yeah, but like the beauty of what's happening back there,
Yeah.
the sort of crazy ballet that's not about art, but is about the practical, but that has a level of art to it.
Well, that's what's been so heartening about Rolling With Beer. Like a place like Interact Taking Chance on this play is, as a young playwright, I was sort of always told, right, small cast, no set, and that's how that's what's going to get produced.
Big cast, crazy set.
And I wrote this being like, this is the one that no one's going to do, and it's the first one that anyone ever did. But it's actually because places like Interact got excited about the challenge of it.
Yeah.
And so it's totally like screwed with my head in terms of like what I think people want
What
to
are
do.
the rules?
Right. Yeah, I mean, it just teaches you again not to anticipate, just to write the thing you're going to write and not anticipate because the rules you're getting are from 10 years ago.
Well, it's also though. I mean, a few years ago we did this really fun play called Exit Interview, and the guy who wrote it, Will Missouri Downs, a wonderful playwright, super funny, and he was like, "This is the play I wrote that I was like, screw it. I'm just going to write an insane play that no one will ever do that just makes me happy." And that place had productions all over the country.
Yeah.
And he's like, every time I hear a story like this, I feel like, if you try to write to production, you will never write from your heart. When you write from your heart, that's when people will get excited about your work and they'll find a way to make it happen.
Well, and I think these institutions are ambitious. I mean, they want to set those challenges, and their audiences don't want to see 2 or 3 character plays all the time.
No,
Not
not every slot of the season. It can get tedious.
Yeah. So it's been really cool to see that, and then to see it in each place. I mean, I feel like we've learned so much about the choreography of the kitchen, so that it's like, and I mean, it's the best education to be in that many different rooms, talking about your play. Because one combination of actors may get one thing and another may get another, but you actually learn, you just learn how to communicate what's in your script. And I've also then gone and like, especially for a play like this, like that has this choreography, I've tried to figure out a way to create like my script is now more of a performance Bible that has research.
Like
and,
a band, no
and that's a thing I never would have learned had I not had these experiences. And had I had only one world premiere, in New York or something, I wouldn't have necessarily made an artifact that could then carry over production and production around the country because you just sort of like, and at the end hooks you up with actually a process of productions, which is incredible.
And I think every time we do a world premiere, I feel like working with the writer when we get to the end of the premiere, the writer's like, now I understand the play. And like the draft that happens after that first production is the draft where the writer was able to like see those few things that actually needed to fall into place for the play to reach its full potential.
Yeah.
So to me, this is the real gift of the Rolling World Premiere, is it understands that like a play doesn't exist until you've produced it and put it in front of audiences and had a chance to like feel each other out.
Yeah.
So that's rad. So what are you doing after all this? I mean, graduating.
Graduating, and then I have no idea.
Would anyone like to give Will a job?
I probably will go, back to New York for a little bit. But I think one of the things that NPN has taught me is just how much theater is being made around the country, and it's actually caused me to question. It's like I think there are opportunities in a lot of cities around the country for playwrights, which I don't think I would have said 3 or more years ago.
I don't know if it was true.
Yeah,
like,
it's
a lot of places are like,
we're in the middle of some new kind of moment, some new invention here, which is really
I think so
tremendously exciting. So I mean, for me, it's just to continue to write, to get a chance to, the next challenge I think is figuring out institutions where I can bring a play and do the biggest thing for me is access to really quality actors. You know, I think, you know, and it's one thing you can certainly get pizza and beer and have your friends over and read it, but like to give that chance where you're in a room working on something and people are like, oh, we're at the office doing this.
Right.
To find an institution where you can get access to really, really good actors, to
Yeah.
hear new plays, so you can get them ready for production. Because I think Knife had the advantage of having been with groups of actors at different times, so that when it finally got to the point to go to a production, I knew loosely how to talk about it.
Right.
We were actually just trying to complete the play.
Yeah.
So that's the next thing I'm trying to figure out.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like a local acting pool that has depth and quality.
Yeah.
That's key.
Yeah, and I'm so excited to be in Philadelphia. Like this
We're glad
cast
to
is
have
amazing.
you. It is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Not to brag or anything, but that's a pretty great room of actors.
Yeah, it's so
They're
much fun
awesome.
watching.
Yeah, good, cool. Thanks for talking to us.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, Interact TV watchers.
Shut up and sit down.